welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for how to stand out in an interview. I'm going to share my screen. So today we are going to introduce the panelists, and then we have 4 sections of interview questions. So pre-interview, during the interview, post-interview, there's 2 in the middle. And we'll show questions that we'll be asking during each session, and then we'll do Q&A about that segment at the end of that segment. If you are looking to seek Compass, Passport, or Connect points, that's great. There's nothing you need to do right now other than sit back, pay attention, learn something about interviews, and then we'll use the Zoom attendance for collecting the points and assigning those to you. So nothing you need to do on your end in regards to that. Also a notice of recording. We are recording this session and we will be posting it to our career development channel on YouTube. So if you'd like to look back at it later, feel free. Or if you have a friend who missed it and wants to look at it, you can direct them there. It'll be up in a few days. So quick introductions. I'm Kelsey Nager. I'm the Employer Experience Coordinator at the Career Development Center. I work with employers to get them to career fairs and on-campus interviews and sessions like these. I'm also a USD alum and also pursuing my MBA at USD. So Torero through and through. I'd like to pass it off to Emily.
Great, thank you, Kelsey. My name is Emily Bax. I'm one of the career counselors here in CDEV, and I have a graduate degree from USD, so I'm also a Torero.
And then Kelly, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Kelly Porciello. I'm a staffing advisor at San Diego Gas and Electric. I've been there for about 2 years, and before that, I was with the Metropolitan Transit System, the bus and trolleys. I was the recruitment supervisor for about 12 years over there. So happy to be here today and share some tips for how to stand out in an interview.
Great, thank you, Kelly. So as I said, our agenda will be interview preparation, and then we'll have a few questions for virtual interviewing tips. We'll have day of interview tips and then post-interview tips. And then after each of these sections, we'll have some Q&A for you to ask questions about that specific section. And then at the end, if we have time, we'll also have general Q&A. So without further ado, these are the 3 questions we'll be asking the panelists. I wanted to let you all view them so you knew what was going to be asked, and you can think of other questions that you may want to follow up with after this section. I'll stop the screen now. And the first question goes to Emily. How should students prepare for an interview?
Great, thank you, Kelsey. So preparing for an interview is the best way to be successful at an interview. And I tend to break it down into a couple of different chunks. So one is you really want to know the company and the position that you're applying for. So do the research that you can online, reread the job description. If you can collect information in other places, that's excellent. While you're doing that research, you can also prepare questions to ask the interviewer. So I think that's a great thing to do. You want to have some thoughtful questions that show that you have an understanding of the company and the position and ways to learn more and showing that interest. I think it's really important also to sort of know yourself, meaning know what you want to say before you go in there. What do you want the recruiter to know about you? And again, this can be guided by that job description and knowing what is important to the company. But I think of it as preparing almost like a thesis statement for your interview. So try to clarify 3 to 5 things that you really want them to know about you, and make sure you have stories that illustrate those experiences or qualities. Lastly, I think you just really want to practice answering questions out loud. So do it by yourself, use an online tool like Interview Stream through CDEV, grab your roommate, anyone, but practice answering some of those interview questions out loud. Not because you're going to memorize the answers, but just because it's going to make you feel more comfortable and be more fluent and articulate when you're talking about your strengths.
Thank you, Emily. Kelly, do you have any information on what kind of information students should research about an organization before an interview?
Yes, I do. I think Emily touched on this as well, but I think the most important thing you can do besides reading the company's webpage, going to all their social media, see what the current events are, what's the latest that's happening at that company. I think the most important thing is to really dive into that job description and know the job that you're applying to. So the job description is a legal document. It was put together to accurately describe the job. And so when you read that job description and the requirements, you want to make sure that you have an idea of ways that you have actually done those job duties, maybe through your schoolwork or a group project, and think of ways that you have examples in your pocket that you come out with in an interview. So really know the job that you're applying to. I've been in, I wish I could quantify, probably thousands of interviews. And what really kills the interview is if the person isn't really sure what the job's about or what they're interviewing for, you're going to be out of the running in no time. So really get to know that job description and the company's latest happenings, which you'll find, like I said, on social media, or their LinkedIn page is a great place to check too. Thanks, Kelsey. And I have my cat. She always likes to make an appearance when I start talking.
We love animal drop-ins.
Yes.
Thank you. Those were great tips. And I know when I was applying for jobs, I would copy paste the job description and save it, which I highly recommend doing because those job descriptions may disappear between when you apply and when you interview for the position. So always copy paste them or download them and you'll have them on hand for the interview. Mm-hmm. And then even I went line by line and did sub bullets of times that I utilized that skill or did that task. And that really helped me prepare for interviews as well. It's just, oh, I did this at this internship. I can talk towards that. So great tips, Kelly. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelsey.
This question goes to both of you. What do you recommend a student wears to a virtual interview?
I can start there. I think when I first started interviewing for jobs, it was like clear cut. You wear a suit. I had to wear pantyhose. That tells you how long ago I was first in the job market, how embarrassing. But nowadays, I think it depends on the company culture, and it's really hard to know. So I always say go as conservative as possible. It's never going to hurt to wear a tie, a suit, a blazer, anything that looks really professional. Don't assume that, if they're a startup that they're going to want you to dress casually. I think starting off an interview looking as professional as you can is not going to hurt you. And then maybe later you'll find out that that's not typically what everyone wears, but I would always plan on wearing something very professional, a suit, tie, unless you're told otherwise. Maybe the recruiter may tell you, hey, it's casual Friday. Don't worry about dressing up. We're all going to be casual. Sometimes they will let you know that, but sometimes they won't. So err on the side of professional.
Totally agree with Kelly on everything she says. You can't be overdressed.
Yeah.
And for virtual interviewing, I've been telling people wear exactly what you would wear to an in-person interview.
Perfect. Thank you both. Those were great tips. So I want to open it up to the students. You can unmute yourself, you can message in the chat and I can read it aloud for you. But do you have any questions on preparing for interviews? The next section will be virtual interview tips. So we'll save those questions later. But Mary Logan, you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question. So I actually have an internship interview next week, and I had just had a different one last week. And so something that kind of threw me off that I actually didn't know to prepare for was they asked me some like pretty bizarre questions. And I'm sure you guys have like heard of these, but they like asked me who would win in a fight, a polar bear or a shark, and I guess there was a right answer. Or like they asked me how many basketballs I could fit in a room, and like how I would do that. So I guess like they were looking for how I would answer and how creative I would be. But I was wondering if you guys had any tips on that for those like random questions they ask you.
I personally do not like those questions because it's so hard to gauge whether you're talking about the actual qualifications of the job. But I know there are people who like to think out of the box and think that they're gonna, pick the best out of the best with whatever answer you give them. But I think in those situations, I don't even think they're looking for a right or wrong. They just want to hear your thought process and what you think of what the answer would be. And if you don't think it's totally right, I think it helps to talk it out. Don't be afraid to talk about your thought process, what you're thinking about when you're trying to answer that question, and just answer it the best that you can. They're just looking for they're hoping that you're not going to get stumped and get thrown off, and they want people who can answer things on the fly, because that's probably part of the job that they want you to do. So don't get discouraged, don't get flustered, answer it the best that you can, and just know there's no right or wrong. They just want to hear your thought process on how you would resolve some of those. Filling a room with basketballs, I don't know, that is an odd one. Good that you got an interview, though. That's the biggest step, is at least getting the interview. So good job on that.
Yeah, thank you. That helps. I did get the internship too, so that was nice.
Oh,
but
good.
yeah, I'm just
Congrats.
kind of also looking other places. So thank you.
Thanks, Mary.
Great question. And I mean, if you work for an NBA team, maybe you do have to fit some basketballs in a room. Any other questions regarding interview preparation? Okay, I'll share my screen for the next section. If any questions arise, please feel free to add them to the chat. So the next section is virtual interview tips. We'll be asking about technical tips you'd recommend, body language, eye contact, how to limit distractions, and how early should you log in for a virtual interview. So the first question goes to Kelly. What are technical tips you'd recommend?
Yes, so at San Diego Gas and Electric, we use Microsoft Teams. And so I think each company is going to use their different platforms, but I think making sure that it's loaded on your whatever device you're going to use, and practice with somebody. Get a friend to download it on their device and practice to make sure that it works. I've had a few instances over the year where the camera wouldn't work, and so we didn't see her face through the whole interview, and unfortunately it did put her at a disadvantage because we weren't able to see her. We could hear her, which was the most important part, but I think just naturally we weren't able to evaluate her and see her body language and her facial expressions, as well as some of the other candidates who were able to figure it out. And so she also had some other technical issues, and so it made us think, gosh, is she going to have trouble with some of the technology that she has to use? Probably not, but it kind of makes the interview panel question that when you can't get it right. So you definitely want to make sure that you practice it ahead of time. Make sure your audio, your microphone works, the sound works, because there's so many different platforms. We use Teams, like I said, but there's Zoom, there's Skype, there's WebEx, whatever. So you want to make sure that it all works for when your time comes. Thanks, Kelsey.
Great tips, Kelly. Emily, the next question is for you. What tips do you have about body language, eye contact, and limiting distractions during a virtual interview?
All great questions, and ones that I've heard a lot this year. I think the main thing is recognizing that the video platform provides you with the opportunity to communicate in ways more than just language. So as Kelly just said, people can see your interest, your engagement, and through your expressions, through your body language. So generally, I encourage people to be able to sit with your feet on the floor. And that may sound strange, but if your feet are up, it's too easy to kind of be like doing some of this. Like you can see how distracting that is for me if I'm kind of wiggling around. So if you've got your feet on the floor, that's going to kind of help you be still. Eye contact is huge. So practice talking while you look right at the camera. So if I'm looking right at my webcam, it looks more like I'm talking to you. Now, if I look down at the screen where I'm seeing someone else, I can see their face, but it doesn't have the same effect of having that eye contact. So I'd say look right at the camera. With body language too, it's just like a regular interview. Sit up straight, be attentive. You're not going to lean, can't do quite as much leaning back and forth as you can in person because you're up so close to the camera. But if you're wondering what it looks like when you're interviewing, record yourself, go into Zoom, hit record, answer a few questions, and then play it back so you can see how it really looks on the other end.
Great, thank you. I feel like it's always more comfortable when you have your feet on the ground too, so I second that. The next question is for Kelly. How early should a student log in for a virtual interview?
That is a good question. I don't think too many people think about that, but it is important. I would say 10 minutes probably before the scheduled time is. That gives you time to make sure there are no issues. It shows the interview panel that you're ready to go. I wouldn't log on too much earlier than 10 minutes because likely they're not going to be ready for you. And a lot of times they're interviewing people right up to your scheduled interview time. So don't panic if it's a couple minutes over your interview time and no one's there yet. Just kind of sit tight. They're probably wrapping up the interview that was right before you. So I would say 5 to 10 minutes, make sure that everything's set up, log in. Typically you're waiting in the lobby, so they know that you're there, you're good to go, and you'll be all prepared for when the interview time starts. That's what I would say.
Great, thanks. I know it's a little different in the virtual world.
Right, that would be like 15 minutes, a little bit longer in the non-virtual world. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any student questions for virtual interviewing tips? We'll also go into day of interview in a moment. Okay, we'll move on to the next section then, but please raise your hand, unmute, or chat in the text box if you have any questions. So the next section is day of interview tips. So the questions we'll be asking the panelists are: how does a student make a strong first impression? How do you answer behavioral-based questions and what are they? What are some of the most common questions you ask in interviews? And what are good questions students can ask during an interview? So the first question goes to both panelists. How does a student make a strong first impression?
Go ahead, Kelly.
Okay,
I'll let you go.
Thanks, Emily. So I think anybody who's interviewing and wants to make a strong first impression is what we talked about in the beginning. One of our first questions when we interview candidates is, tell us about yourself, typically, and then the next question is, tell us what you know about the company or what you know about this job. And the people who can really express what they've learned from reading up on the job in our company blow us out of the water. We're really impressed by that, especially if you're interviewing for like an accounting finance job and you're rattling off, what our budget is or what the board meeting, what they talked about related to our expenditures, something related to the job like that, we're really impressed. So I think that starts it off. And we can tell that you're really interested in the job and you're showing your enthusiasm, which are also super important. You want to make it look like you're really interested in the job and you're really going to put in your all. So I think that would be the most important thing.
Right, I totally agree with that. I think showing that research and that enthusiasm is huge. And then some of the technical or logistical details we mentioned too. Obviously, be a little early. Be dressed appropriately, make eye contact, just show that you're eager and interested to be there.
Thank you both, great tips. The next question is for Emily. How do you answer behavioral-based interview questions and what are behavioral-based interview questions?
Great, thanks, Kelsey. So behavioral-based interviewing, sometimes called situational interviewing, behavioral-based interview questions are the questions where the recruiter or the interviewer is going to ask you to talk about a specific incident or time or situation from your past. So they're phrased something like, tell me about a time when your leadership was challenged, or tell me about a time that you had to deal with a difficult customer. So really what you need to answer is with one specific example. So be careful not to generalize like, oh, I dealt with a lot of difficult customers when I worked at Target, and this is how I generally did it. What you want to do is pick one specific time, and you're going to answer it sort of in stages. There's actually a framework for answering these questions, and we have some resources on that. And I know Kelsey's going to send those out after the interview or after the workshop. So the three pieces that you want to describe are the situation or the task. So what was the situation you were in? What were the actions you took? So how did you manage or deal with this issue or situation? And then the last part is what was the result? So what happened because of what you did? And that's a piece that people generally leave off. It's a pretty natural way to answer, I think, to describe the situation and talk about your actions, but people sometimes forget about the result. And if a company or a recruiter is using behavioral-based interviewing, they are going to be listening for that result. And sometimes we'll even ask follow-up questions to try to get it. So it's really important to prepare some stories ahead of time. You don't know what questions you're going to be asked, but you can think about things you're proud of, challenges you've overcome, examples of you working in a team or showing leadership or showing technical skills. Prepare some of those stories ahead of time and practice talking about them. And that'll really help you and give you a leg up when you get to the interview.
Great tips, Emily. And I think your previous tip too about vocalizing your responses to interview questions comes very much in handy when doing the response to behavioral-based interviewing. So highly recommend thinking about those situations and then also practicing verbalizing them because that helps a lot and cuts out your ums, which is always great to do. The next question is for Kelly. What are some of the most common questions you ask during an interview?
Yes, so at San Diego Gas and Electric, and probably most companies, at least that I've worked with, we do use the behavioral based questions. And so most of our jobs follow our company values. So at SDG&E, we want to do the right thing, champion people, and build a brighter future. And so a lot of our questions are around those values. And so questions we ask are, tell us about a time when you went above and beyond what was asked, because we're looking for people who just don't want to do the minimum. They really go above and beyond. They volunteer for projects. They volunteer to do things that they think they can't do, but they want to stretch themselves and contribute to the team. We also ask about multitasking a lot. How do you manage all of the things that you have to do? Everyone's so busy. Some of us are better than others, but if you can think of real concrete examples of how you manage your time, some of you probably work, you go to school, you're into different clubs. How do you manage all that? It's really hard for a lot of us. So tell us about the calendars that you use or the technology that you use to keep you on track. We also, a big thing too for most companies and especially ours is how you get along with others. Are you a team player? We're not going to have perfect situations where we get along with everybody all the time. So tell us about that time when you had trouble working with somebody, and we'll leave it really general like that because we don't want you to say, oh, I get along with everybody. I never have any issues. I can't think of a time because I really get along with everyone. Okay, but that's probably true, but think about a time where somebody was just difficult to work with. I know we've all had that. So tell us how you handle those challenging situations. Do you confront the person? Do you try to resolve it with the person? Understand their perspective and ask them about it, put yourself in their shoes. So we want to just make sure that you're a team player and you have that. A big thing for us is growth mindset. So you don't just go with the status quo. You're looking to grow, and that also involves your relationship with your coworkers and customers. So questions like that relate to our company values.
Great, Kelly. Those are awesome questions to ask. And what are good questions for students to ask during an interview? That's for Kelly, sorry.
Yeah, sure. Oh, thanks. I get some really good ones. And a lot of times we get asked why did I choose to work for San Diego Gas and Electric? What makes me stay there? Why do I like it? And I know that some people may think it's a cliche question, but to me, when I was interviewing at SDG&E, I wanted to know that too. It was a really hard decision for me to make a move from MTS to SDG&E. So why should I? Why do people like working there? Am I going to like it? It's as much an interview of me, of the company, as it is the company of me. So this is your chance to ask people those kind of questions. You're evaluating whether you really want this job. So why do you like working there? What are the most, what's the most important competencies that this job needs? And what are the goals that you expect for this person to complete within the first year? What's priority for this position? And then you can kind of answer, you ask them, they answer, and then you can maybe touch on something that you didn't get to touch on in the interview. Oh, actually, yeah, I didn't mention this before, but I have done that. The goal that you need this person to do and accomplish, I've actually done something similar, and it might be your chance to plug in something that you didn't get to plug in earlier in the interview. So that's what I would say.
That's great. And I love that it's your interview as much as it is theirs point.
Mm-hmm.
What I always love to encourage people to ask too is if you're interviewing with your with someone who could be your direct supervisor, you could ask like, what's the leadership style?
Mm-hmm.
And learn more about them so that you can see if it's a good fit for you as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'd love to open it up to students. Do you have any questions for Kelly or for Emily regarding interview or day of interview questions?
I see a question in the chat, Kelsey.
Oh, did I miss? I think it may have been directly to you.
Oh yeah, it is. You're right. Yeah. Okay, I'll chat back. Unless you want me to read it out loud, I'll chat back.
If it's relevant to the whole group, feel free to chat or feel free to vocalize it.
Okay, yeah, it's a great question from Aya. What do you think probably the best way to answer how we manage our time and the calendar we use? It's a good question. Some of the good answers that I've heard, somebody actually told me about a book that she read, and I wrote it down because I want to read this book, but it was a book about how this professional time management person, the best way to organize your time and prioritize all the tasks that you have on your list. And she didn't just say, this is the book and I've read it. She actually went into how she's applied what she read in that book to her everyday life. And she had school, she had a full-time job, she was helping a sick family member at home, so she was super busy, and she was able to relate how that book has helped her in life. So if you have something like that, a tool that you use, I attended a Franklin Covey webinar about how to time manage yourself, and I've learned a lot from that. So you could answer something like that, a book that you've read or a webinar or Outlook. Maybe you use a paper calendar, anything to show us that it's important to you and it works.
They're great tips. I know when I had to answer that question coming out of college, I also used the example of like, this one semester I had this leadership opportunity. I was taking this many classes, and I was also part-time working or something, and talked about like my successes in how that semester happened by my organizational methods. So you can always tie that into as well.
Yes, that's great.
Ooh, a couple great questions are coming in. So one question is it good to ask about sustainability or a company's mission for the future?
I would say absolutely. it's something that's important to you as the job seeker. So absolutely, I get asked that when I'm on an interview panel. People want to know, how does the future look? And we as the panelists should be able to answer that for you. Some companies may not have, an answer that you're looking for. Us, San Diego Gas and Electric, we are an essential business. We hired 1,100 people last year, more than we have in years. I actually think it might have been our record year of hiring. So we're able to say, our future is bright. We have a stable working environment. We are hiring like crazy. So those are the things that the company should be able to answer for you.
Thanks, Kelly. Emily, did you have anything to add?
I thought that was a great answer. I would say, I think this goes without saying, but of course, see what you can research about those things online as well to show that you are, if they have a big section on sustainability on their webpage, you want to have that information and then ask even more in-depth questions based on that.
Great point. Thank you. So another question that came in was, should we take notes during the interviews?
Absolutely. Yeah, I know I did when I interviewed at SDG&E. You're nervous. There's a lot to think about. You're trying to answer things correctly. You're trying to pay attention to your body language. You're not going to remember everything that was said that you might need to follow up on. So definitely take notes, and the panelists would love to see that you're taking it seriously and want to remember what's being said.
I totally agree with that too. If you're worried that they can't see exactly what you're doing, if it's a virtual interview, it's also fine just to say, is that all right if I take notes? Or if you see me looking down, I'm just taking some notes.
Great, thank you. This question I'm going to direct towards Emily. What type of questions would be good to ask during an interview for a graduate school program?
For the person to ask I'm assuming asking the person interviewing them. Similarly, you want, with graduate school, you're going to be asked a lot of the similar type of questions. And instead of trying to see if you're a good fit for the job, they're going to try to see if you're a good fit for the program. Will you have success in that program? Do you understand what the program's all about? So I think the questions that you can ask them will be around the program itself and how it may fit with your academic or professional goals. Some graduate, depending on the type of graduate program you're going through, you may have the opportunity to meet specifically with faculty who you might be doing research with. And of course, for them, it would be very specific questions around their research and some of those more, technical type questions. But for the interview, I think it's asking those same kinds of questions about culture and fit. What type of student has been successful in this program, things like that.
Thanks, Emily. The next question that came in was, how do you address questions that require you to talk about your shortcomings or areas of improvement? Are there some wrong answers here? I'll leave that open to either of you.
I'd love to hear what Kelly has to say about that.
I know we all hate these questions, and you Google what you're supposed to answer, you're going to find a bunch of things on Google on how to answer these kinds of questions. I'm trying to think, we phrase it a little differently, but you hear the standard, please tell us what your biggest weakness is and how you're trying to overcome it, something like that. We phrase it a little bit differently, but what we're looking for is we all have weaknesses, and don't ever say, don't say you're a perfectionist or something like that, because a lot of people say that. You try to think of something else, but we just want to hear some honesty. And what we're looking for is that you've recognized it, you're self-aware, you've taken ownership of this area that you need to improve, you're holding yourself accountable, and you're working towards improving it. That's what we want to see, that you're working towards improving it. Maybe you have improved on it and you have an example of how you have improved that skill. For me, I think when I was interviewing, I was asked something like that, and my answer at the time was that I found it hard to delegate. When I was supervising a recruitment team, I would just take on too much or not delegate, or just think I would be quicker if I just did it, but I was losing an opportunity to develop my team and empower them to do things that they could do absolutely and needed to do. And so I was able to share that I worked on that skill. I took a class on improving delegation, and I worked with my supervisor on how he delegates and what kind of methods he uses, and the benefits of delegating and the downfalls of delegating, and just trying to show that I've learned from that and I'm still working on it. So I think that would be something that you could share, that you're improving on it. You're taking steps to improve it. It's a tough one though, I know.
That was a great example. Thanks, Kelly, for sharing that.
Sure.
Emily, did you have anything you'd like to add to that one?
Oh, that was great. I was going to say that's generally how I coach students, is pick something sincere and then just talk about how you deal with it or improving it. I did have a recruiter. I did think of one when Kelly was sharing. I had a recruiter years ago who said the best answer he'd ever heard to that was someone who said, "I'm a terrible speller. And I have learned to always use spell check. And if I'm sending something outside of the office, I make sure I have another set of eyes on it before I send it out." And he said, I loved it because it was real. He talked about how he handled it. He didn't go on and on about how he'd always been a terrible speller and all the problems he'd had with spelling and all the problems he caused with his spelling. He said, but it also wasn't a deal breaker, you know, so you don't want to pick something so egregious.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, hopefully, you know, you don't have any faults that would prevent you from doing the job effectively.
Yeah, if it's an engineering role and you say I'm not great at engineering, that would probably not be that might be a red flag.
I love to embezzle from
Right.
my company, but I'm trying not to anymore. Yeah.
I had somebody say that they weren't the best reader. They didn't like to read, but it was like a paralegal job where there is a lot of reading and reading comprehension. So you don't, like you said, you don't want to say something that's a big part of the job you're interviewing for.
Definitely. Okay, for time's sake, I'm gonna go through the post-interview section, and then it seems like we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So the next section is post-interview. The questions we'll be asking is, how important is it to send thank you notes? Is an email okay? And besides a thank you note, how should students follow up, and how frequently should they follow up? So the first question goes to both of you. How important is it to send a thank you note, and is an email okay?
I was going to say, I keep having a standoff. I'm like,
I know. I don't want to keep going first.
No,
okay.
You're my guest.
Thanks, Emily. So yes, I think thank you notes are still very important. I get them more frequently via email rather than a written note these days. And I think that's perfectly fine, especially in the environment that we're in. Any note to thank the panelists for their time and to reiterate why you think you're a good fit for the role. And anything, you know, I always say it's great to throw your personality in there any way you can. I know SDG&E is all about bringing your whole self to work. And I think more and more companies are adopting that kind of philosophy that bring your whole self. That's why we hired you. We want your perspectives. We want your, you know, we want you to bring your personality. So, you know, throw a piece of information in that thank you note that you learned about the panelists. You know, they're a big Cleveland Cavaliers fan. I'm saying that because my husband is. But something in there to show a little personal touch, I think would help. But definitely send an email to thank them for their time and reiterate why you would be a good fit. Honestly, I don't really get thank you notes very often anymore. And when we do, it's like, oh, awesome, good job. Thanks for sending that. I really appreciate it. And it does make you stand out, I think.
Yeah, that's what we hear. This is a question we ask our recruiters and our employer advisory team over and over. And we hear the same thing, like, yes, we're human. We love to get thank you notes. And I think as students and interviewees, it's just part of showing how you show up as a human and how you're going to show up as a teammate, showing that appreciation. They took their time, you know, to interview you, to read your materials. So thanking them for that. It doesn't have to turn into a huge sales pitch. You know, it doesn't have to be you, saying again how great you would be. You can talk about your excitement about the position or enthusiasm, and it's just saying thank you. And I think it can set you apart from other candidates, but it also shows, you know, how you're going to be as a colleague.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. And to what Kelly said too, is adding something personal. Whenever I interviewed for a job, I always kind of took notes about if I heard anything from the panelists that I either shared in common with them or something that really stood out to me about what they said. And I tried to incorporate that into the thank you. So like, thank you so much. I'm also a fellow Torero, or thank you so much. Like, I really loved hearing about your day-to-day job. This part would really excite me, or something to that effect, so that it ties in what you said during the interview as well.
And thank everybody. That's the other thing I forgot to say. Try to get the names of the people. If you have multiple people that are on a panel, whoever helped coordinate your interview should be able to help direct you to get their email addresses or be able to connect with them. But also thank the person who did all the coordinating for you. So you may have a person who was setting up your interviews and doing things like that, but didn't actually interview you. Thank that person for their time. It goes a long way.
Definitely. Okay, the last question is for Kelly. Besides a thank you note, how should students follow up after an interview, and how frequently should they follow up? Are LinkedIn invitations okay?
Yes, this is a delicate balance. And I think when I talk to friends and family who are interviewing, and probably the most common thing I hear is, gosh, I interviewed on Monday. It's Friday. I haven't heard anything. Should I email them? Why haven't I heard anything? And even I tell them that like the conception of time from you as a candidate is so slow because you're eager to hear about it. But from the panelist side, they have so much going on. You know, they have their jobs that they still have to do, and now they're recruiting on the side. And so the process always takes much longer than we expect on our side, and you as the candidate expect. So even if the recruiter says, you know, we should have a update for you by the end of next week, I think it's safe to follow up. You know, it's Friday next week. They said they were going to have an update for you by the end of next week. Follow up on that Friday and say, hey, I know you said you were going to have an update. I was just checking in to see if there's been any news. I think that's definitely okay to do. And in the interview, you can also ask, when do you expect to be done with the process, or when do you expect to follow up with candidates, so you have an idea. Sometimes people go on vacation and they forgot to tell you, any host of things. But if they tell you a time, I think it's absolutely okay to follow up, but not too much. Send that one email. If you don't hear anything, follow up maybe a couple days later. Just give them some time, because really they're so busy. They haven't forgotten about you, but things are just so busy. It's just taking a while to get through the process. Oh, and LinkedIn, yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn invitations, A-okay. I usually accept only from people that I actually have met or know. So if I've interviewed with you, I'll absolutely connect with you on LinkedIn.
Thank you, Kelly.
Sure.
One other thing I wanted to say before we open up to general Q&A, I always love to give this tip during the session. Create an Excel spreadsheet or some type of tracking method of where you've applied, what your status is, if you have interviewed there, what day you interviewed there, if you know any connections there, if you have a username and password to get into their system to apply to other jobs. Keep a spreadsheet. I applied to many jobs after graduating, and that spreadsheet was a lifesaver. It also helps with the follow-up process, because you can say, oh, I interviewed for you, like, hey, just wanted to follow up about my interview on this date. It keeps things really clean and neat. And then assist or pairing that with downloading all of the job descriptions and everything. Those are the two tips that I always give during the session, because you never think of it until after the fact, and it keeps you organized to do those things.
That's a great tip. Definitely.
Okay, so I want to open it up to Q&A generally. Trying to go back to where there's a few in the chat, so I'm going to start reading those. Feel free to unmute or keep chatting them, and I'll keep going down the list as I receive them. So the next question was, if an employer hasn't emailed you back after an interview, how long would a normal time frame be for it to assume that you didn't get the job?
I hate I hate hearing these stories where you spent your time interviewing with somebody and they don't get back to you, and some people never hear anything. I think that is just so inconsiderate, but unfortunately, I know it happens a lot. I think if you had an interview and they didn't give you a time frame, I think a week after your interview is a good time to follow up. If they still don't respond to that email and it's been a couple weeks, they're supposed to get back to you either way. So don't assume you didn't get it. But I would say follow up twice. Follow up a week after the interview, follow up a week later if you still haven't heard anything. And then after that, just decide that this is probably not a company that you want to work for anyway. If they treat their people like that and are not considerate of their time or following up with them, probably don't want to work there anyway. So just move on.
Thank you, Kelly. Emily, did you have anything to add for that one?
I would just say, kind of echoing what Kelly said earlier, it always takes longer than you think it's going to. So sometimes when you've given up all hope and you're pretty sure they're not going to call you back, that may be when you hear from them.
Yeah.
And you can keep it in your spreadsheet too, the last time they contacted you. So that could help as well. Okay, the next one is, do you shake hands or bump elbows with everyone on the panel interview? Do you do this when you walk in the room and before you exit?
I know, gosh.
An in-person interview situation.
Yeah, I wonder how this is going to change, honestly, after COVID, if handshakes are going to be different now. But pre-COVID, definitely a nice, confident handshake is always good. I think you take the cue from them, from whoever the panel is. If they're reaching their hand out, I think it's appropriate to shake hands. I don't know about a fist bump or elbow bump, but who knows what our future is going to be post-virtual world. But yeah, I think take the cue from the panelists.
I would say the same thing, or even ask maybe what their comfort level is if you're walking into the room.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how COVID changes everything. Okay, the next question that came in is, would it be okay to ask interviewers about actions a company is taking regarding diversity or social impact? I recognize it'd be best to research ahead of time anyways, but sometimes it's not always explicit and I'm unsure if it's necessarily appropriate.
I'd say it's appropriate. And that is absolutely a question that you want to know about a company's culture. I think, of course, the way you phrase it, it's giving them an opportunity to show good things that their company is doing. That's how I look at it. So I'd love to, I read about your mission and your values on your website. I'd love to hear more about your diversity and inclusion efforts. And if any of that has changed this past year. Give them an opportunity to tell you what they're working on that may not be public, but I think you can learn so much too from the responses of the people in the room, both with their content and how they deliver it, that may give you really important information about whether or not you'd want to work at that company or what's important for them and for you.
Yeah, I would echo that, Emily. Absolutely. I love when people ask me or the panel about that at SDG&E, because I'm so proud of this aspect of our culture that I love talking about it. And I would love to tell you as a candidate what we're doing and how our culture supports diversity and inclusion. It's one of the reasons that I love working there. So absolutely, if it's important to you, as it probably is for most of us, absolutely. And most companies will be proud, hopefully, of the culture that supports it. I know SDG&E is. And like you said, I think, Regina, you mentioned that you can find it probably on their website, but asking from actual employees what their perspective is, I think will tell you a lot. And even now, our interview questions are asking you as a candidate about what your perspectives are on diversity and inclusion. And we want to hear examples of how you keep an open mind and appreciate others' perspectives and put yourself in their shoes. So our questions focus on asking you about diversity and inclusion. So it's definitely an important topic to keep in mind on both sides.
Thank you both. And reiterating what Kelly said earlier about it's your interview as much as it is theirs, it is your time to ask that question too. So if that is important to you, I think, yes, you can see some of it online, but it's definitely good to ask. If there aren't any other questions in the chat right now, but please, we have 8 minutes and we have a recruiter and a counselor here, so take advantage of it. Feel free to either type it in or raise your hand, unmute yourself, whatever works best for you. I guess in the meantime, Kelly, I know you said that SDG&E has been recruiting. What types of roles have you been recruiting for over the last year, and what do you have entry level and internship opportunities?
We do, yeah. Good time to plug that. Yes, we have internship and associate full-time positions in accounting, finance, engineering, IT. Those are our more entry-level programs, but I had no idea before I joined the company how many different areas that we hire for: customer service, to the call center, to risk management, obviously HR, legal. I mean, probably every area that you would have interest in, we probably have a department and somebody hiring for it. So yeah, 1,100 hires last year. So definitely actively hiring and recruiting right now for those entry level programs, internships and associates. Thanks for asking.
Of course, it's always great to hear.
And we love USD students, so definitely appreciate them.
Felix, you have a question?
So in regards to like drinking water or coughing or sneezing in this virtual interview, how do you go about doing that and recovering from that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the right company, I mean, we all are forgiving, you know, we have, you know, cats, we have dogs barking. I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old at home who are really quiet right now for some reason, but there's constant interruptions. And I think, you know, as the interview panelists, we totally understand if you sneeze. I'm trying to think if I've had anything like that recently. We know that you're nervous too. It's nerve-wracking for everybody. So don't let an interruption at home or a cough or a sneeze throw you off. Most panelists, most companies are going to be accepting and understanding, and probably, you know, turn it into a humorous situation that we can all laugh about and kind of break the ice. So I wouldn't worry too much about those things.
Thank you.
Thanks, Felix. Good question.
Another question came in. I understand that we should practice looking at the camera while talking. What do you recommend doing while listening to the recruiter? I tend to struggle with looking as engaged as possible without staring at the screen where the person is, and or looking towards the camera without looking disengaged.
Do you want to go first, Emily?
I was just going to say, Alyssa, you have hit the struggle right there, because I feel like I try to look like what I'm saying, looking at the camera, but I also want to be looking down because I'm trying to read their facial expressions too. So when I'm listening, I try to kind of go between. I don't know if there's a right answer for this, and I'll see what Kelly's perspective is, but I try to both be looking so that Kelly, you know, looks like I'm giving her eye contact, but at the same time, kind of looking down at where her picture is so that I can see her nonverbals. I wish the camera was right in the middle of the screen, but it isn't. I don't know, Kelly, what do you think?
I know, same. And I think it's okay to, I think you mentioned this before, Emily, is to talk about it. You know, it's okay. Like I was in an interview and I had my interview notes over here on this monitor, you know, to my right, but the camera is here. So I had to say, you know, I have to move my interview notes. So I may be looking over here, but I'm paying attention. I'm just typing my notes. So just letting people just making them aware, like, hey, my camera's over here, but I need to type notes over here. Just letting the panel know that you're trying to make it look like you're engaged, but you have certain things going on that may look like it. Just communicate. But it is weird to look at the camera, look down, and your eyes are kind of darting around. I know. I think if the camera was right in the middle, Emily, that would be, if they can figure that out. Yeah.
I apologize to all of you. I did not communicate in advance. My notes are to the left. So.
Thank you, Kelsey.
We have 3 minutes. Any last burning questions about how to stand out in an interview? How to prepare for it? Kelly, do you have examples of what not to ask during an interview, maybe?
Gosh, I haven't had too many of those over the years, but one thing I think you may hear differing opinions from different recruiters, but I think most recruiters that I talk to, including my own opinion, is to not ask how you did. When the interview's over, saying, how did I do? Like, what did you think? Is there, and I know the spirit of it is to find out if there's anything that you could address that maybe didn't come across well or you want to improve, but probably not the best time to ask. And it kind of puts the panel in an awkward situation because they haven't debriefed about the interview, and you're not really going to get any sort of answer that you can get value from. So I would stay away from asking that, and asking about like vacation policies or time off. You can ask the recruiter that maybe down the line when the interview's over. And pay, the interview is not the time to ask about pay or those kind of details. So I would stay away from those topics.
Thanks, Kelly.
Sure.
Sorry to put you on the spot about that.
That's okay.
Okay, well, we have 1 minute left, but I am going to copy paste a survey in. We'd love to hear your feedback about today's event so that we can improve it for future events. So feel free to fill out that survey. I'll also be sending a follow-up email with the survey as well as some of the career resources we have regarding interviews. So I'll send that out today or early tomorrow morning. So be in the lookout for that. But thank you all for coming, and thank you, Kelly, for being on this panel, and Emily, as always. It's
Thanks
great
for having
to see
me.
everyone.
Let's say thank you, Kelly, and good luck, students, on all your interviews.
Yes, good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.